Good morning, my fellow treasure hunters, explorers, and researchers. If you haven't already subscribed to my channel, please subscribe, and if you enjoy this content, please like it and share it so that my channel can continue to grow and I can continue to bring more research and information and trips into the field. Our subject of today is Lost Treasures of the Old Spanish Trail, the book by George Thompson. We're in chapter 2 of Gods, Men, and Slaves. Vasco Nunez de Balboa was numbered among the first Spanish treasure hunters. It was in 1513 that he discovered the South Sea, the Pacific Ocean, and claimed all of the land of Castilla del Oro for Spain. He discovered the wealth of the Indies to be greater than that even of the Spanish crown. But the hardships his men suffered getting those riches for the king were terrible, and in a letter written to His Majesty on January the 20th, 1513, he told how food was more important to them than gold. I have taken care that everything obtained has been properly divided, the gold and the pearls, but we have valued food more than the gold, for we have more gold than health. And I have searched in many directions, desirous more to find a sack of corn than a bag of gold. Like Columbus before him, Balboa discovered Indian mines, which had been worked for centuries. He was among the first to describe Indian mining methods. The Indians collect the gold without any trouble after the river beds are laid bare. They also wait until the hills are dry, then set fire to them, where they gather great quantities of beautiful grains of gold. They bring it in to be melted to the Indian they call Daviv, who has a great place for melting it in his house, and where he has 100 men continually working at the gold. It is very clear that even the earliest Spanish explorers discovered that the Indians were excellent miners and even had places where they worked the gold. Balboa's letter and the hoard of treasure he sent to King Ferdinand quickly encouraged even better equipped treasure hunts. In 1518, Don Juan de Grijalva was dispatched to the Gulf Coast to investigate stories of gold and gems to be found there. Grijalva did find treasure wonderful to behold, but his expedition was destined to be overshadowed by the fantastic odyssey of Cortez only a year later. Hernando Cortez was born in 1485, and at age 17 he became a soldier for the king. By 1504 he had made his way to Hispaniola, now Haiti, where his uncle was the governor. His uncle offered young Cortez a plantation, to which Cortez replied, "I came to get gold, not to till the soil like a peasant." Cortez did accept a large plantation, however, which soon made him rich. In 1519 he was commissioned capital general by the Indies by his uncle. With some 550 men, but only 16 horses and 14 cannons, Cortez sailed westward to explore the Gulf Coast. On April 21st, 1519, he landed near where Columbus had sailed a generation earlier. From there he began the conquest of Mexico, burning his ships behind him so that his frightened men would not desert him. Indian runners quickly informed Emperor Montezuma of the ship's landing, and the emperor, with hopes of bribing the Spaniards not to march on Mexico City, sent a chief with more than 100 Indians bearing gifts for Cortez. The first was a great disc, 6 feet high, representing the sun, with many designs on it, the whole of pure gold. The next was even a larger disc of pure silver, which represented the moon. They then gave us golden ducks, monkeys, tigers, deer, lions, all beautifully worked and natural looking. Also many precious necklaces, golden scepters, arm and leg bands, and headbands, all of the finest gold. And then taking some of our helmets, they filled it with gold also. But instead of appeasing Cortez, the almost unbelievable gifts only whetted his appetite for more. Taking 400 of his best men armed with deadly harbusk firearms, Cortez faced the Emperor Montezuma's forces of tens of thousands of well-disciplined fighters. it had not been for the Aztec god Quetzalcoatl, the Spanish invaders would have been slaughtered. To the Aztecs, Quetzalcoatl was a fair-skinned god of peace who, according to legend, had once lived among them. He taught them not only to be the ways of peace and happiness, but how to cast metals, how to record the calculations of the calendar, and many other useful things. Quetzalcoatl disappeared into the east, but he promised that one day he would return to live among them again and teach them the ways of peace. Quetzalcoatl was considered a god, and that when he returned, he was going to rule in peace. And anyway, Montezuma received the news that a fair-skinned godlike figure had arrived from the east in a great sailing ship. He believed that Quetzalcoatl had returned as promised, although many of his closest advisors doubted that Cortez was really a god. Montezuma allowed his small army to march inland, where, after an 83-day forced march between the 1,800-foot volcanic peaks Popocatépetl and Citapel, they arrived at the island of Tenochtitlan, Mexico City, where they looked upon the palace of the emperor. When Cortez demonstrated to Montezuma that simply by pointing his hibiscus rifle at one of his bodyguards, the guard would be killed, and that his horses and animals, which the terrified Indians had never seen, could catch anyone he ordered them to, Montezuma accepted him as Quetzalcoatl, saying, "You must be a god." For centuries, Indians from distant provinces in the north had paid the emperor tribute in gold and silver, so that by the arrival of Cortez, their storehouses were filled with treasure, and more was being received at the rate of 2 tons a year. I don't know where he gets that figure either. But temples were heavily plated with gold, while almost every native appeared to wear ornaments of precious metal and gemstone. Cortez was presented with gifts he could never have imagined: gold necklaces and jewelry, a turquoise face mask, woven textiles, and most impressive of all, discs of hammered gold and silver the size of cartwheels. When he saw how little value the Indians placed on their fabulous treasure, Cortez took Montezuma prisoner and held him for ransom. Within only a few days, the citizens of Mexico filled a room 17 by 22 feet with gold for their emperor's release. But when Cortez saw how easily the huge ransom had been collected, he refused to release Montezuma. The Spaniards were appalled at the human sacrifices made daily by the Aztecs, and were horrified by the estimated 100,000 human skulls they were shown. Opening up the human breasts, they pulled out still beating hearts and offered them on their heinous altars. They believed they had made a ritual sacrifice to their heathen gods. Enraged at the Indians' barbarism, Cortez ordered their idols destroyed. Then, fearing an attack, he had 3,000 Indians slaughtered. The Indians revolted, and in a terrible battle drove the Spaniards from the city, losing additional thousands of warriors, but inflicting heavy losses on the Spaniards. 45 of his already small army had been killed, while 60 more were badly wounded. Cortez had the bodies of his dead soldiers secretly buried, so the Indians wouldn't know that gods could be killed. Cortez and his men had the great advantage of armor, including metal helmets, jackets of mail, and heavy iron or leather shields. A priest described the advantage of armor. A soldier well armored and mounted on an armored horse is like a moving fortress. The soldiers had become most dexterous in making armor for their horses, using the thickness of 2 bull hides, through which arrows cannot penetrate. Because of the weight of the armor, the horse is not used until the moment of battle. The point of danger lies in the possibility of an Indian throwing himself under the horse to sever its tendons. A soldier heavily laden with armor, once fallen from his horse, is at the mercy of the savages, who carry war clubs, lances, and bows with arrows. The battle to regain Mexico City was a terrible one, which, according to Cortez, resulted in the death of nearly 100,000 Indians. He wrote, "Because I feared the enemy was so compact that my men might be crushed by their great numbers, I ordered my soldiers to do damage with our field pieces. No understanding can conceive how they endured it. An infinite number of men, women, and children kept coming towards us, who in their haste pushed one another into the water and were drowned amidst their multitude of dead. It appears they perished there to the number of more than 50,000. The slaughter done that day on land numbered more than 40,000 men, and it was not possible to prevent the massacre of 15,000 more until we could no longer endure the stench of the dead who had lain for days on the streets. Cortez and his soldiers finally fought their way back into the city on August 13, 1521. But by then Montezuma was dead, stoned to death by his own people, and most of his fabulous treasure had been hidden. It has never been found, but Aztec legend tells that the emperor's servant Thalacule, at Montezuma's orders, took the vast treasure hundreds of miles to the north to their ancestral homeland, where much of it had come from and where it was hidden in great caverns. At Mexico City, Cortez found hoards of treasure which had been hidden by its citizens, and also recovered part of Montezuma's ransom, which had been thrown into the lake when his soldiers were forced from the city. Only a small part of the treasure was recovered, but it was still a fabulous fortune. Recovered were 150,000 Castillons of gold, 88,000 pesos in gold bars, thousands of gold plates, and a mass of jewels. From one sealed treasure room found by his soldiers, Cortez took gold worth more than 600,000 ducats. 600,000 ducats, which were melted into bars 3 fingers wide. During the next 2 years, Cortez sent 10 tons of gold to Spain at the king's quinto, basically his 1/5 share, which is 20%. More than all the nations of Europe except Spain then possessed. In a letter to the king, Cortez described some of the royal fifth. Of all the gold melted, 1/5 was put aside for the royal treasury, as well as jewels, 33 ounces of gold in ingots, and 60,000 ounces of gold Castellanos. I also sent a field piece made entirely of silver, which cost me in metalworking alone some 35,000 ounces of gold. This I sent, as well as certain gold and silver ornaments, jewels, and gems. Of the richness of the land, Viceroy Marquez de Monteclares later wrote, "Truly the land is overflowing with wealth, so that it is deemed easier and cheaper to arm men and to shoe horses with silver than it is with iron." Of course, the silver was much easier to work. To the earliest explorers, they quickly learned that the New World was a virtual treasure house of precious metals and gemstones. But they were restricted from working the mines where the treasure came from by their sheer lack of numbers. Only a few hundred Spanish arrived with each galleon, and their numbers were decimated by disease and warfare with the Indians, who greatly outnumbered them. Of the 1,300 Spanish soldiers who had been sent to the New World by then, the Indians had killed 862. Many had been eaten by the cannibalistic tribes along the Mexico coast. Balboa had described the state of affairs to the king. 2 days' journey from here there is a very beautiful country inhabited by a very evil race, who eat as many of our men as they can catch. They have no chief, and they are lords of the mines, which are the richest in the world. These Indians have deserved death 1,000 times over, for they are a very evil race who have killed many of our Christians. I would not make slaves of so bad a people, but would order them to be destroyed, both old and young, so that no memory of them might remain. As early as 1495, Columbus had solved the problem of the lack of Spanish manpower to work in the mines, or at plantations, by a system called ecomedia, that in effect assigns Indians to provide labor and tribute to a Spanish overlord in order to receive Christian instructions from him, but it became just another name for slavery. After an uprising, Columbus imposed a tribute on the Indians. He taxed each a hawk bill of gold or an aurora, or 25 pounds, of cotton every 3 months. He then assigned their already cultivated lands to the Spaniards, and each allotment included the forced labor of its former owner. In 1502, the king legalized the encomienda, and except for a short period from 1542 to 1545, it remained the law of the Indies for 300 years. By 1520, the king had also authorized the branding of slaves, but stipulated that they should not be branded on the face. That was a nice guy, huh? It was the encomienda system, slavery that made possible the legal looting of the wealth of the Americas, for the Indians were soon being forced to work in mines or on rancheras under the most terrible conditions. Each grant of land given by the king included a specified number of Indians, each of whom was expected to pay tribute. His royal orders read, "Also, because in order to secure gold and do the other tasks I am ordering done, it will be necessary to employ the service of Indians, and you are to compel them to work in the affairs of our service. If the Indians could not pay their assessed tribute, they could work their tax as vassals. Since they couldn't pay the tribute, there became no real distinction between the encomienda and the actual slavery." It probably never occurred to the king that New Spain was anything except his personal property, existing for the sole purpose of enriching his royal treasury. Therefore, if it was necessary for the Indians to perform the heavy work at the mines and ranches, so be it. Indians were considered equal only to stock animals and to be disposed of at the will of the landlord or transferred on sale of the land to the new owner. Little wonder that by the end of the 3rd century of Spanish occupation, the Indian population of America had been reduced to 1/2 of its former number. And because of the diseases brought with them, I would suggest that that number was much higher. You know, according to the Spanish rule, it was set up so that if an Indian was converted, that he would be able to receive his freedom. But they didn't have to teach them the principles and tenets of Christianity or how they could be converted so they could get their freedom until after they had worked off the system of encomienda. So, pretty corrupt and conniving system to enslave someone and not tell them how they could become free and force them to be slaves until they earn the right to be able to be taught. And as you can imagine, that who was in charge of determining when they had paid for their freedom? You know, it was the owners of the mines and the missions and the fields. And so obviously there was no incentive there to teach the Indians or to convert them to Christianity. And obviously this system was never something that Jesus Christ ever taught. You know, he taught that all men are to be free and free to choose, you know, how they worship and how they live. So anyway, that's chapter 2, Lost Treasures on the Old Spanish Trail. I don't agree with everything that George Thompson has written. I've done a lot of the same research that he has and studied the same history all my life. And his account of Montezuma, some of those things aren't entirely accurate. But the timeline, for instance, Montezuma was killed by his own people while Cortez was trying to secure freedom for himself and his men to be able to leave the city with all their treasure. And the people literally stoned Montezuma while he was captured, while he was trying to speak to them from the top of the temple. And that's what resulted in the battle. Once Cortez saw they were going to kill Montezuma, he had nothing to ransom his way out of the city with, and so that's when they had to barricade themselves in and waited for nightfall, and then tried to sneak out with a whole bunch of treasure. And of course the Aztec attacked them, and the Aztec, which numbered in the millions, would have wiped them off the face of the earth. But it just so happened that the disease of smallpox, which the Aztec had brought with them, was ravaging the entire city. And so these people were fighting while they were afflicted with this terrible disease, and as many as died in the battle died from the effects of the smallpox. And so that was what allowed Cortez to and his men to escape the city, was the fact of how sick the Indians were. So anyway, please like and subscribe to my channel, and share this video with your friends. And right now we've got a lot of snow outside. It's been very cold. It's been a wet winter, which we've needed, but I'm really starting to get spring fever. I'm looking forward to spring and to being able to get out and work on some of our projects that we've got, and we're going to be looking at some mines. We're going to be chasing some cache sites. We've got a few people that have hired us to use technology and our research to help them out with their projects, and so it should be a very interesting and fun summer and year. And we're going to video a lot of these things, and the things that we're allowed to by the people we're working with to share, or our own projects. We'll share those things, the things that we find, and our adventures. And so I hope you'll stay tuned. Thanks. Hope you have a great day. Mm-hmm.